Yeah, so hi everyone. My name's Myke Mates. That's me with the horse head. And tonight we're going to be horsing around with the grid and just a little bit more on that title here in a second. But so yeah, from Springfield, I recently quit my job of a decade at doing web development for an advertising agency to do my own startup. So yeah, that's been about 3 weeks now. So life's different for me, and it was fun to be able to come up here for a night and be able to chat with you all. So before I jump in anywhere, I'm just curious. I always kind of like to get a feel for where the room's at. So familiarity with Flexbox, who's using the flexers? Okay. And how about grid? So, oh, more people. Okay, interesting. Well, okay, so tonight I'm going to focus mainly on grids. Who feels like they've got grid down? Kind of confusing? Yeah, it's weird. There's a lot to it, and so my goal for tonight is to kind of start with where we were at before grid and see what grid does for us by way of actually writing some code. So we'll see something start from nothing and kind of advance it along, starting with Flexbox, and see where grid kind of comes into play. So before we jump into code, though, just kind of get some the boring stuff out of the way. I've got maybe 10 slides or so, but I feel like it kind of helps tie things together here. So CSS grid layout is the most powerful layout system available. The big thing about it is it's a two-dimensional system, whereas Flexbox is more of a one-dimensional system, and more on that in a bit. But much like Flexbox, you work with applying CSS rules to both the parent and the children inside of that element. So just kind of some visuals about what you can do with grid, right? So kind of when I say grid and envision grid in my mind, this is kind of what I think of, right? Kind of a really typical grid-like setup. Something like this, probably not going to have to deal with a whole lot. There aren't many websites that are going to take this kind of layout unless you've just got some unique scenarios, but that's grid. Something like this, grid as well. So, you think about what it would take to kind of get things to flow like this, and that's going to take a little bit of work, right? Maybe some weird absolute positioning or some sort of JavaScript masonry type framework to kind of get this to automatically lay out for you, but this too is something that grid can start to handle with relative ease. Calendars, right? That's just a natural kind of grid, so on the right there. And yes, even really simple layout, right? So you look at this and think, I could do that with floats, anything. That's not that much. But when you start to get into some of the just small details, like the margins in between each of those items and the height at which they expand to, right? These kind of things start to get a little bit annoying to deal with. So even this CSS grid is good for. So, like I kind of mentioned, when pitching this is, you got tables, floats, flexes, and grids, and just all sorts of stuff. But why would you care? Why not just use those old things, and why the grid, right? So, I'm probably preaching to the choir here. We're in a web development group, so tables and floats, those were meant for specific things. And those things were not layout, right? It was presenting data in a tabular form. Floats, you think of floats and you think like text around an image, this kind of stuff. Doing layouts with this, especially with tables, is ridiculously challenging. If anybody does any email development or anything like that, you know how much it sucks. Floats, you got to clear the floats, right? Like most of us, this is second nature to us now, but why, right? It's just yuck. Then you got Flexbox, and Flexbox is awesome. But the way I kind of like to talk about Flexbox is it's really good at going like this, horizontal, or it's really good at going like this, vertical, right? But it falls apart when you kind of want to do both of those, right? When you want to go both across and up and down. And so I've got a video that kind of portrays this, just for fun. Or not.
Yeah, but there's a Maserati in the driveway.
Gives a that has doors that open like this.
Not like this. Like this. You want to know what I have? A car whose doors open like this. Not like this. Not like this. These are not the doors of a billionaire, Richard.
I just kind of put it in there because I love Silicon Valley. Who doesn't? But anyways, I was always kind of found myself going like this, and then Russ Hanneman drove the point home for me. So any Silicon Valley fans out there, you're welcome. So grid, again, is perfect for handling those like seemingly simple layouts, right? That last example I showed with just kind of a really simple product grid. Like that's pretty easy, but some of those small things can end up causing grief. And grid just handles this so naturally. Browser support. I kind of get annoyed anytime I hear somebody talking about grid and they fail to mention the browser support, because this is something that should be mentioned right up front. It's pretty much modern browsers only. I mean, even IE 11 kind of poorly supports grid. It supports an older spec of it, and there are some really important pieces in there that it doesn't support at all. So let's just kind of take a look at how this breaks down. So, of course, Edge, Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Safari, all the new stuff, it's going to work just fine. No problems. But once you get into the Internet Explorer realm, even if it's 11, you're still going to have some issues. So I said it kind of supports some of it. What I found myself doing when I really want to use the grid is I will use the grid, and I'll kind of fall back to older methods where I don't really care about the results so much. So for example, let's just say I've got, a grid of images and they're going 3 across, 3 across, 3 across. I'll just float them, put a width of, whatever, 33.333%, and I won't really worry myself with the margins, for example. I won't worry myself that the first one starting has margin on it when it shouldn't, right? Or the last one has margin on it and it shouldn't. I just kind of say, screw it, right? Like, because that allows me to not have to really do things twice. I kind of have to do them 1.5 times, but for those browsers that support grid, like I'm getting that perfect experience out of it. And the dinosaurs using IE, like who cares? Like they're seeing the web broken anyways, so at least it's not totally broken. And also the modern browsers will do a really good job at figuring out if you have floated something and then it is a grid item, it will know that not to apply that float. So it'll ignore a lot of those items, in favor of the grid spec. So that's kind of my rant on that. If you have to use IE10 and IE11 and say like you've got a business, they're kind of they're using the site all the time, you're probably going to have to bite the bullet and not use grid. But so that's that. Quick overview of some of the terms, especially for those in here that haven't really started looking into this. I'm going to gloss over a lot of these, but some of these are new terms, and so I just kind of wanted to get them out there. Template columns, rows. We'll get into this gap, template areas, fractional units. This was a new one for me. I didn't learn about fractional units until I started looking at grid. And then some CSS functions, repeat and min max. Auto fit and fill, again, also new for me with grid. Just kind of wanted to say those words at least once. Grid line, this gets pretty boring, so again, I'm going to gloss over it. So a grid line is going to be that piece kind of in between pieces. So, I mean, as it's shown there, it's either going to be, vertical or horizontal. The track is the space between those two adjacent lines. When I first put this presentation together, I thought, man, these terms are really important. And then I started working with it and realized, they're really not, so whatever. Grid cell is an individual item in the grid. Grid area is kind of the total space that's, is encompassed by a grid. And yes, huge. So there's a really good CSS tricks article that I go to all the time if I'm looking at Flexbox properties or CSS grid properties. It lays it out perfectly. And I wanted to illustrate just how big the CSS grid spec is, the things that it can do, and probably the main reason why we're not going to go over even a fourth of it tonight. So here is a quick, just little scroll through. You gonna work? Man, hating me. There we go. Okay, So this is the Flexbox. You're not supposed to really see anything here besides the length of this article. This is all the Flexbox stuff. Really good summary. That's how long it took me to scroll through it. And then here's same site, same awesome content, but on grid. And you can see how significantly longer it is compared to Flexbox. I think we finally hit comments or something, so yeah. It's a lot longer. And lastly, because it's so vast, just the main goal for tonight was to show some realistic scenarios of what you can use grid for. If you haven't used grid, this should hopefully inspire you to want to start using it. If you have used it, hopefully we can hit a couple topics here that maybe you weren't too familiar with, or whatever, just kind of echo stuff to one another. So the horsing around bit, I've got a framework of my own imagining, and I call it horse strap. And so everything is just kind of a horse joke with me. But anyways, so you'll see me using some things here that you may not be familiar with. It really doesn't matter for what we're doing, but if you're wondering what's going on, that's it. I'm try to make this bigger. Okay, that's about as big as it goes. Okay, so first thing is I'm gonna run horse strap. And just a little, while this is running here, I really don't like frameworks, Bootstrap, Foundation, they all just get in my way. I don't like using them, but I love the idea of having something really simple that I can just run one line and just start working, right? So I'm almost there. This is a total work in progress. But anyways, I'm gonna run a yarn install. I could have run that before I was blabbing more. So anyways, that's that. Any .NET fans in here? Yeah, couple, yeah. Using Razor, so Razor pages. I love Razor. Almost done. Okay. Yeah, I'm not even going to use it anymore after this, so I'll, and I will zoom in over here. Sorry, I got to do some quick housekeeping. Okay, I think that should do it. Sorry, I really like to start with nothing so you can see everything happen. All right, I just copied a bunch of images over that are going to get used, and then I've also got just some really, all right, I'm going to adjust a little bit, sorry. I just got some colors that I'm going to use, so this is really nothing to do with grid, just kind of setting up some basic styles for what we're going to create here. So let's just make sure we're working first. Save, refresh, no. Okay, I think we're good. You are not reloading on me. Okay, we'll have to manually reload every time. That's cool. All right, So we're going to start off with just a list here. I'm going to give it class of colors. That was some of the stuff we junked up in there. Yes, my key that has dust in it and doesn't, so the J sticks. We'll see how well that does here. Let's see if this works. Live coding is fun, right? Okay, there we go. So the idea is we just basically have a list of album covers, and we want to start making them look like something presentable that you would actually have on a website. So just really basic over here, just looping over. We're going to show 12 images, and yeah, that's about that. So we're first going to start off with, not a new folder. Okay, just importing a couple files. Okay, here we go. So who knows what'll happen when I put display flex on this unordered list. Where's my Flexbox people at? Yep, nailed it. Wish my live reload was working. Come on, oh, no, hey, come on. It's killing me. Styles. Okay, tell you what. Okay, so it's got a bunch of other junk in there. What is going on? Sorry, this wasn't part of the plan. Flex, got nothing in there. Pages. All right. Flexers. Gonna work now. My live reloading is just not happy right now. What do you got? Sorry, everyone. Yep, you see what I'm doing there? Let's try this again. Should have pitched this as how to debug local. What was that? Close this. flex 2. All right, for the life of me, I don't know what's up. I'm so sorry. All right, let's just, you know what? Quit old Chrome here and open the old Firefox. And we're just gonna. All right. Yeah, I do. Okay, inline CSS. Let's do this. Man. All right. Oh, yeah. Okay, there it is. It goes like that. Yeah. Man, sorry. Ridiculous. All right. Yeah, I'll be going back to find out what happened there later tonight, so that's fun. Oh, don't even. Okay, there we go. I think. Good enough. Who cares? We're moving forward. Okay, so that's Flexbox. Yeah, all right, okay. All right, so what we want is a really nice kind of more full width grid showing these things off. Now I'm going to start talking really fast to keep getting through this stuff. So let's start with, now I can't nest anything. Oh, man. There we go. Let's just start off by making each one of these LIs something like 25%. What is even happening? Flex 2. Okay. All right. I think we're good here. Man, talk about losing frame of mind there. All right. Flex wrap. We're gonna set this to wrap. Okay. We should be rocking here. Okay. So this is roughly the extent of Flexbox's two-dimensional. So by default, when you display Flex, what it's going to do is try and shove everything that's in that parent, it's going to fit as much as it can into one line. And so by setting the Flex wrap to wrap, you are then allowing it to wrap down. And so by setting the width of the LI, you can see that we're kind of starting to get what we want out of this. Where things start to break down a little bit with Flexbox is when you start to do something like this. Right now, we've got a perfect amount of items in there, but what? Sorry. This is no amount of fun. wrap. Oh man, this is just killing me. All right. Wow. So, okay, yeah, thanks. What is supposed to happen here, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why it's not happening, is Flexbox will take orphaned pieces that don't run all the way across, and it will, oh, I know why, man. All right, guys, I'm going to try and get it together for you here. So this is setting with 25% on these, but if I want some more margin inside of here, if I set like 20 pixels on these list items here, as you would expect, the width plus the margin starts to break that flow. And so what you can do, of course, is you could use calc to set the width to 25% minus the 20 pixels, and that'll naturally start to handle it for you. But you have to do that math, and it gets kind of annoying. So what I typically like to do is set the width to just a little bit less. So let's just say like 23%, and then get rid of this margin. And as you'd expect, it's 23%, so it's not going to fill everything up. But with Flexbox, you can justify the content, and you can tell it to be space between everything. And when you do that, what's going to happen is it will take the leftover space and apply it in between each of those items. So if we refresh, we'll see that it naturally pushes everything out, but you have those orphan pieces down there, and so it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's taking the leftover space and putting it between all of the items. So there are ways around this, but it starts to get a little bit hacky and a little bit irritating to deal with. And naturally, this is where I was supposed to smoothly segue into, this is where CSS Grid starts to work really well. So we're going to do that now by changing this class to grid. Everything should reset here. And this is part of the problem. I'm changing to grid 2. It's caching some stuff in here is the big problem, and I don't know why. Grid 2. Now when I set the display to grid, any ideas what happens? You'd be forgiven for thinking that. But when I refresh, it actually does nothing, just like everything else in my presentation has been doing. But this one legitimately does nothing. Because you have to supply more detail to what it's supposed to be doing. So by just putting grid on there, nothing happens. And this is when we start getting into some new terminology. For example, grid template columns. So things start to get pretty interesting here. If I were to say 300 pixel, 300 pixel, 300 pixels, what will end up happening here is you start to get this grid now. What I've done is basically defined the columns. I told it, give me 3 columns here that are 300 pixels wide each. So of course, if I were to change, say this middle one to 100 pixels here, you kind of see what starts happening. So already you can start to see how this is kind of useful, a little weird, like nobody really wants to write stuff up like that, but that's what you get. And we'll see how to start cleaning this up. Again, we can do both ways here. So not only columns, but we also get rows. So I can set the template of the rows here, and we'll just say like 500 pixels, just one, right? And so this first row here is 500 pixels tall. The rest of them are just kind of self-sizing there. And that is actually what is referred to as implicit grid and explicit grid. So you can explicitly set it to be, like I did here, 500 pixels for that first one. And the browser just kind of takes over and does implicitly what it's going to do. So that's one piece of terminology there. Oh yeah, that's why this is breaking down. I'm gonna get this out of here. I'm trying to nest inside of there, and I'm just in, I'm not in SAS, so it's not gonna be nesting. Now, let's clean this up a little bit. So instead of typing 300 pixels for the number of rows you want, you actually get a handy little function called repeat. So I can tell it 3 times to repeat a value. So of course we end up with what we expected there, and if I wanted it 5 times, you kind of understand what you get there. And then this is where the fractional unit comes into play. So typically, you're going to be dealing with a responsive style website. So setting something specifically to pixels is not going to be very handy for you. So if I refresh this now, previously when I had it set to 300 pixels, we had the gaps on the side there, and we'll illustrate this even further. There we go. Start to get rid of some of those default margins in there. So yeah, that is the repeat function. Now we start getting pretty interesting. So we want that nice spacing in there, and that's when we use the grid gap. So let's just set the gap to something like 1em. The awesome thing about the grid gap is it automatically will know to not apply it to outer edges. So you don't have to deal with trying to get like the first child or last child and start removing those margins or paddings in there. So that alone is just really handy, not having to detect those things. And then of course, we have a responsive site. And so we really want to, when we get down to more of a mobile phone size, we want to naturally kind of start showing 2 of those and then 1 of those. And it gets really easy to deal with this by just doing something like, of course, my niceties aren't working. Oh man. Screen. Oh man. At. This should get funny. I think that'll work. Since I'm in Razor, it doesn't like my at symbol. All right. See if this works. Oh. Nope. Come on. Come on. That should bark at me. Yep. Okay. Razor people, .NET people, any media. It's mad about my at symbol. I didn't expect it. What's that? It is 2 ats. 2 ats? Yeah, that's right. Grid 2.
Can you view an app media inside of a class like that?
Oh, yeah, that might be it. Sorry. Yep.
Maybe you just put it in the style.
Yeah. We're gonna get this. It's funny how SAS has crippled me. Is that? Oh, come on. Snippets. Yeah, of course. Like that? There? So like that? Oh man, if this works, you get a beer on me. Ah, come on. Ah. All right. Wait, so what'd you say? Ah. All right, hang on. Let's. Can I grab this? Will you work with me now? Man. What are you angry about? Okay.
Maybe give it another class besides grade 2, just its own class.
Grade 3. Who would have thunk this would get so royally messed up? Grade 3 at Space Media.
Razor page I don't think should matter. Just one outside.
Oh. All right. Man, all right. Let's just leave on a high note, maybe. Okay. Let's keep going with this. Where the heck was I even? So grid 3 li. Nope. Yep, hold on. All right. Get rid of you. Okay. 9 years later. Okay, so there's that media queries getting down there. Yeah, let's do another media query. And we'll set it at 500 pixels. And just set it to 1. So naturally, this should give us what you would kind of expect out of that. But grid actually makes it nice. You don't even have to go to these kind of lengths to get that kind of functionality. Because, let me show you. Oh, yeah, that'll probably mess something all sorts up. Go back to just grid 2 here. And instead of setting this to repeat 3 and 1 FR, we're actually going to set, excuse me, grid template columns to auto fit. Sorry. Tell it to auto fit, and then we're going to use the min max function to set a minimum amount and then a maximum amount. And hopefully, if this works, yeah, okay. Auto fit min max. Oh. Snippets. Anybody on the live stream? Sorry, I'm sure you're tuned out by now, but okay. So here's same thing, but using the min-max approach, will naturally do this. But here's the cool thing: is it won't just do downward size. It will actually stay as you're growing it out too. So if we're trying to have to deal with all of those individually, it would kind of suck. So you just kind of tell it, once you reach that 300 pixel threshold, just stretch as far as you can. And if you're exceeding that, actually shift the grid down so it can fit the appropriate amount in there. So that's kind of the idea there. How much, time-wise, what do I have till? Oh, okay. All right. Woo! It's a lot more pain. No, I'll keep it hopefully pretty simple here. Wanted to touch on one more area, and that is grid template areas by name. So this actually starts to get pretty interesting. If I come down in here and add, let's just say, artist name and then album name. By default, it's just going to kind of put it in there. It's going to do what you would expect. But start to get crafty here. So on our list items themselves, we're going to display grid, and if you remember by default, that does nothing. And so next thing we're going to do is set up the grid template columns, and we're going to right now set this to 200 pixels and 1 fractional unit. So if we take a look at what it's doing right now, it's a little weird. It looks like hell. Because what it's doing is it knows that inside the list item itself, it wants a 200 pixel column and then just show the rest over here. And so what it doesn't know how to do is do anything with that third one. So it took what was inside of the LI, which was an image, an H1, and an H2, and said, okay, I know the image is supposed to be 200 pixels, and then the next item just show the rest of the width. So it reached that third one, and it was just like, throw it on the next. That's cool. And so that's naturally what it's supposed to be doing. But if we come in here and set up the grid template areas, this syntax is kind of interesting. It's almost kind of like you use words to describe a layout. So I'm going to say artwork and artist. And then on another line, artwork and album. So let's just see if this does anything for us first. Doesn't appear to be. So what we need to do is actually assign these grid areas. So if I tell the image that its grid area is going to be artwork, and then just going to duplicate this. The H1 is going to be artist, and the H2 will be album. So after we've set up, oh man, I'm nesting inside of here using CSS. Grid 3 LI. I think that should do it. Yep. Okay. So what happened here is now we're starting to define layout with these grid template areas. And so if you look at this as almost kind of an actual layout, we're saying artwork here, right? Artwork, and then artist and album. And so because it knows that's now basically our HTML, this up here, the grid template columns, knows to apply 200 pixels to the artwork, which is taking up 2 rows, and then artist and album get the 1 fractional unit that's left over. So effectively, we're relaying out our markup with CSS template areas. How to find it? So down here, I set the image grid area to artwork, which matches up to the string that it's set up to in the template area. So that's where you are assigning it its spot in that. Yeah. So what gets interesting here is, let's copy that because I'll butcher it again. That. Take these guys. Actually, I want this. So since these pieces know where they should be, because we've assigned them here, if I redefine the template area, and let's just say I want artwork going up here, and now I want artist and album to go in a new row, hopefully this works. So at 500 pixels, we get a reflow of that content. So because just by changing up the template areas, I've now told it that I want the artwork to span entirely across the first row and artist and album to span across the next. So that's interesting and takes a little bit to get used to. But the cool thing about this is now you don't really, the only way we could start to reorder our structure, our markup structure, is by using Flexbox's order. So within a parent, you could set the order for children inside of that. But one of the tricky parts is, or one of the limiting parts rather, is that Flexbox, the order can only affect what's in that immediate parent. And so if you want to start to really reorder stuff, you kind of have to nest into a bunch of flexes. Whereas this, I get this nice little column over here. To do that in Flex, that would have to be wrapped in its own thing, and I can keep kind of rearranging stuff without having to nest them in parents, because this is just a flat level. All I have is just these three things, and I can get really complex with how I want to arrange these layouts simply by using the grid template areas. So you can wildly maneuver stuff. And you want to be careful, right? Like this helps you kind of shift things around. So for your SEO purposes, you're going to want to be careful, because it's probably, if you're trying to put something at the top and your raw markup doesn't actually have that piece at the top, it's going to get rendered a bit differently. So you can't really game the system or anything. But when you get down to like mobile layouts, it's really easy to start moving things of priority around in different orders. I had one more piece that I wanted to show, and it's not local, so it should work just fine. Yeah, all right. So this is a project that I'm working on, and this is, as you can see, it's a really simple grid layout, and if it helps, no, it doesn't help any. Really simple. It's got a gap in there, and specifically I'm stretching it out so it fills the screen up, which allows me to, I'm moving it up and up and up, and that's staying perfectly in there as far as height is concerned. So one thing that I've been looking into is CSS variables, or custom properties, I think as they're technically referred to. And custom properties and grid allow you to do some pretty cool stuff. If I take a look at my cards, you'll see over in the grid template columns, I'm using that repeat function, and that's still not very big. The repeat function and using the var card columns. So I don't know, CSS variables, like has anybody, okay, a little bit, okay, so it's pretty cool stuff. So using something like Sass will allow you to set a variable in a file, and then you've got to compile it, but that'll get used everywhere. So you set a value once, like a color or some sort of width, and you can use it everywhere. But what CSS variables let you do is it lets you affect things in real time. So I've basically got just this value set here. If I come up to my HTML and my root element, I've got card columns defined as 3 right there. So I was using that integer value inside that repeat function. And the lovely thing that this does now is now you can sit there and change values inside of it. So this is not a grid thing, but it does play nice with grid, right? So now, of course, with JavaScript, you can come in here and start affecting values via JavaScript just by changing a CSS property, and it's changing your layout here. So I just kind of wanted to show that as an anecdotal piece of fun stuff with grid and variables. So I know a lot of that was painful, and I'm really sorry about that. That does conclude everything I had, and I'm happy to take any questions and chat. So.
How much of this is native to the browser? Is this a library?
The CSS grid?
Yeah.
It's all native to the browser.
What about Flex? Is that part of Bootstrap? Or is Flex a library, or is it native also?
Also native, yeah. Flexbox and grid are native to the browser. Of course, modern browsers.
So you didn't have to install any
No.
libraries?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, yep. I probably should have started off with saying that. These are all new things that all modern browsers can take advantage of.
Does that make it faster? How does it compare?
Oh yeah, it'll be significantly faster. So I mean, trying to pull off like grid stuff specifically, you can get some really advanced things going that would be impossible otherwise. You'd have to use things like JavaScript and a lot of other weird tricks of manipulating HTML and generally have a whole bunch of classes. Like it'll require you to have, I mean, just think of like Bootstrap, how you kind of keep appending on classes to do stuff like this without the CSS grid spec is hard / impossible sometimes for certain things. Yeah.
What is the FR unit you were using?
The fractional unit. Okay, yeah, I should have touched on that a little bit more. I was a little distressed. Are you familiar with like, think like almost like viewport height and viewport width? It's kind of, and then with flex, what is the, I'm brain farting right now. But basically, if we set something to 1 FR, basically we're setting it to consume 100% of what you can. So if we come back and look at, see if this will even work remotely. Rid of that. And yeah. Rid of that. I promise I'll drive the point home for you here. Okay, hopefully this brings us back to just kind of a plain old grid. Yep, all right. So if I changed this middle one to 1 FR, if I'm not lying to you, what should happen here is the middle image will take up the rest of the space available. So it's telling it basically take up 100% of what you have, which is exactly what it does. So if I were to set it to 0.5 fractional unit, it'll 0.5? Oh yeah, 7.5. It'll take up 75% of what it has left. So you can give it, you know, whatever value you want there, as small as you want. Yeah, kind of get the idea. It is a weird one to think about. It's
Does
a
it have to equal 1 fractional unit if you go 3 rows across like that? Can you multiple FRs?
absolutely, yeah. So we'll set 0.5, 0.25.
It's not required unless you want everything to add up. I think was your question.
Right? So setting 1 unit to 0.25.
If you go larger, I guess, would it go outside the
I do not believe it will. No, I think it's going to play within its bounds there, and that's one of the nice things about Grid is it's not going to blow stuff out for you. Kind of knows how to deal with stuff.
I want to blow out.
Just float it, probably.
I remember like old float hacks, right? It's like, no, I can have it out of the column.
Right.
Over here, thinking it's nothing.
Yep. Yeah, it handles all those niceties for you. It's pretty freaking awesome.
How are you falling back with older browsers? You said you just float it, but how?
Yep. So basically, I'll put my grid stuff just in a, what is the CSS supports, the @supports query. So @supports display grid. I'll put my grid stuff in there just to make sure that only the browsers that support grid will use it. And then above that is where I'll put, you know, float left with 25%, or I'll use a calc. I'll oftentimes use calc because that's supported pretty well across the board. And so, yeah, I just don't concern myself with the rest of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Animation support with grid, or is that like
That good question. So like, are you talking kind of along the lines of like, right, where so it'll kind of be like really nicely kind of. I haven't tried. I looked it up. I remember Googling it. And it said animations are not supported in Grid, but like it depends on what you're talking about, right? Like if it's just a transition, I don't know what it would do. It seems like it should kind of do something. Like if you're going to move it around.
transition a lot of other properties, maybe elements inside and whatnot, but like for instance the template columns when you specify 1 FR or some fixed value like that.
And kind of see them nice, like ease into place.
Media query does something and then it transitions.
Right, right. Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't put it through the paces, but when I remember searching it because I had the same question, And the answer was no, nothing's going to happen. It's just going to kind of snap to you. Yeah. My pleasure. Sorry for the pains. Yeah, we can chat more. But anyways, that's what I got. So.